Well, thank you all so much for joining us for Christmas in Ireland. We're going to explore how Christmas has historically been celebrated in the Emerald Isle and how it is celebrated by many today. The presentation will incorporate recorded music and video to create a holiday-friendly atmosphere. The history of the emergence of the Christian annual celebration in Ireland and elsewhere will be discussed, along with how some of the earlier pagan traditions across Europe, including in Ireland, became incorporated. And tonight's webinar is presented by Sean Murphy, who is a teacher of Irish history, music, and dance, who was born and raised in Dublin and moved to Massachusetts back in 2005. Again, want to thank the libraries in Georgetown, North Andover, and Essex. Want to thank the Friends of the Tewksbury Library for sponsoring, and all 75 of us who are watching live here on Zoom. Let's give a big virtual round of applause to Sean for joining us here tonight. And Sean, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Robert, for your nice introduction, and welcome everybody. As Robert said, I can't see who's there, so I don't know if I know any of you or not. Just a few quick things about me. I've been teaching Irish history now for many a year, and I was, before the pandemic, I used to teach up in the Irish Cultural Centre in Canton, and then in various other locations in Massachusetts. At the end of tonight, I will introduce you to the courses that I will be teaching as we go into next year, the ones that I'm teaching in January. So a quick overview of what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. There's going to be a little bit about how I suppose how Christmas is celebrated in Ireland, just to point out some of the differences. I'm then going to go in to talk about the history of Christmas, about the emergence of Christmas as an annual holiday, and perhaps for some people the most important item on the Christian calendar. But I'm going to talk about that from the point of view that it didn't emerge in a vacuum. So we're going to look at what was going on in the world and how Christianity, emerged from essentially being a persecuted sect to being the official religion of the Roman Empire, and what the implications of that were. We're going to look at some of the transition also involved the incorporation of many of the activities and symbols from the pagan celebrations that happened at that time of the year. And we'll be looking at the reasons why we have a Christian celebration at this time of the year, and why really for Christianity to have emerged victorious within the Roman Empire, why it was necessary to have one at this time of the year. And then I'll play some nice music for you as well. So I'm now going to share my screen, and it will just take a moment or so for that to come up here for you. So for those of you who know a little bit of the Irish language, I'm giving you the interpretation or the how to say Happy Christmas. As you can tell here, we don't say Merry Christmas, we say Happy Christmas. So as Gaeilge, or in Irish, if you're talking to an individual, you say Nollaig Seanna Dith. And if you're talking to a group, it's Nollaig Seanna Díobh. Underneath there is just a decorated tricolour, the flag of the Republic of Ireland. So today in Ireland, people celebrate much the same way as people in various other countries around the world, particularly the Christian countries. But of course, there are some traditions and customs that are either unique to Ireland or are ones that were adopted and continue. So Christmas for Catholic Irish people, because remember, there are people in Ireland who aren't Catholic. There are people in Ireland who aren't Christians as well. So Christmas in Ireland lasts from Christmas Eve to the Feast of the Epiphany on January the 6th. And that's called either Little Christmas or Women's Christmas. And I'll talk about that in a bit of detail later on. So starting at the beginning, there's an old tradition that people put a tall, thick candle on the sill of the largest window after sunset on Christmas Eve. And that's left to burn all night. And in the Christian period, it represents a welcoming light for Mary and Joseph. In terms of ancient Irish history, um, the hospitality was one of the core, if you like, principles on which Irish society was based. And in old Irish law, there were laws that governed the way that hospitality was carried out, and the roles that everybody had within that, and the penalties for not being hospitable. Um, Now that tradition got partially destroyed when the old Celtic society in Ireland came to an end around the beginning of the 17th century, when England, for the first time, controlled the whole of Ireland and introduced its laws and its ways and outlawed all the old Irish ways. But despite that, various traditions continued. And it wasn't really until during the Great Hunger or the famine that the tradition of hospitality was delivered a fairly serious blow, because it got to the point where to invite somebody in to your home was inviting somebody with disease, because any country that has hunger and famine, more people die from disease than anything else. So unfortunately, trying to be hospitable for a lot of people ended up with their families being destroyed. So people had to decide they weren't going to do that. And Ireland never really recovered from that, although people are still hospitable, in Ireland, obviously. Now, the Christmas dinner is, again, separates us out in some sense, because remember, there's no Thanksgiving in Ireland. So we let our turkey grow for an extra 5 or 6 weeks, or whatever it may be. So the center of the Irish dinner is the roast turkey, usually with baked ham. Then we have roast potatoes, Brussels sprouts, stuffing, gravy, cranberry sauce. There are variations around the country. Some people have a round cake full of caraway seeds. Some places actually use spiced beef. And of course, at the end of it all, then there's very rich dessert, which would include things like Christmas pudding, sometimes served with brandy being set alight and poured over it, or poured over it and then set alight, Christmas cake, Yule log, and mince pies. And of course, all of them then doused in various rich sauces. That's the famous Irish Christmas pudding. It is usually it's a wet pudding. You cut it into slices. Some people will then fry it and pour, as I said, maybe brandy or some other alcohol over it, and maybe flambe it. Some people mix brandy with butter and pour that over, heat that up and pour it over. And there's so many different ways to do it. And in the making of the pudding, you can bet that there will be some Guinness and maybe some whiskey put into it as well. So St. Stephen's Day, then the day after, called Boxing Day in lots of places now. It's a very important day in Ireland. And like in a lot of places, you have football matches, some soccer matches, and horse racing, because horse racing is very big in Ireland. But one of the traditions is the Wrenboys procession that takes place on that day, and that is unique to Ireland. Now, there's various Irish legends, and I'm just going to give you two of them. One legend recounts that Saint Stephen, because obviously we're talking about Saint Stephen's Day. So Saint Stephen apparently was the first martyr for Christianity. He was being hunted by the Romans, and he took he hid himself under some bushes, and apparently there was a wren in the bushes that got startled, and that attracted the attention of the Romans. And when he was discovered, then he was stoned to death. That was one of the. There was a variety of punishments for Christians at that time, and one was death by stoning. Then there's another story that's more Irish oriented. The Apparently, there were some Irish soldiers. They had surrounded a Viking party who were camping and who were holed up in a place, and then they were about to ambush them. And there was a wren in one of the trees, and that because the wrens make a lot of noise, so the startled wren anyway attracted the attention of the Vikings, and that messed up the planned ambush. So, because of legends like that, some Irish people held contempt for the wren, and they felt that they should be stoned to death the way that Saint Stephen was. The justification, of course, was that the wren was seen as having earned the cruel punishment. And in the Middle Ages, from around 500 up to about 1500, maybe a little bit beyond, young boys would hunt around and parade its body around, collecting money or collecting alms or whatever in return for a wren's feather, and then they would use the collections then to throw a party. Today, we still have processions, but thankfully, there is no hunting or killing of the wren. So the general episode is historically referred to as hunting the wren. We also know that the tradition, we believe that it predates the Christian times. So local musicians and dancers today and in the past, they would dress up, go house to house and pub to pub and even to hospitals, anywhere that there were people, collect money, food and drink for a party. So St. Stephen's Day, then, it's a day in which there's a lot of money collected for deserving charities. It was said that as well, that if you didn't participate, that woe betide the house that did not donate to the cause. Apparently, the wren could be buried outside your door, and if that happened, it would bring 12 months of bad luck. So this is an image of what they look like, the wren boys would look like today. Here we have 8 of them, and they're getting ready to do an Irish dance, an Irish set dance. An Irish set dance consists of four pairs of people dancing. Now they're out on the street. There will be other people going around collecting money as they do it. So that's just one example. Obviously, there's music as well. So there's bands playing music and other activities that go on at a local level. People come up with all sorts of ideas. So it's an ancient ritual. And as I said, in its original form, then the wren was hunted, killed, and hung on a holly bush. They were hunted for many years throughout Europe in the medieval times. Now, in reality, though, the tradition almost certainly refers back to pagan times, long predating Christianity. And we know that one of the reasons that we believe that is because of what we read in old Celtic mythology about the wren. So we know the wren is one of the smallest birds, but it has a very loud song, and it's sometimes referred to as the king of all birds. And the reason for that was it's a very clever bird, and it earned that in a contest because what it did was it flew higher than any other bird, so it won. And it managed that by getting on the back, hitching a ride, if you like, on an eagle's back. And then at the point where the eagle was at its highest point, and when the clever wren detected that the eagle was getting tired and was about to return to land, it would then launch itself off. And as a result, then it flew higher than the eagle and any other bird. Nowadays, thankfully, no birds are killed. Instead, those engaged, the wren boys, they dress in things like straw suits or other costumes and call into anywhere that there are people. And they play music, they have drums, they sing, and of course, they repeat a rhyme. And the rhyme is they ask a penny for the wren. And that's how they collect their money. The procession had partly died out in the early 20th century, but it has come back a lot now, partly because people like to have a bit of fun on Stephen's Day, but also a lot of charities organize their events around that day. So we on the 6th of January, then we have what's called Women's Christmas or Women's Little Christmas or Little Christmas. In Irish, we refer to it as Nullig Naman. The MBAN is women, so it's Women's Christmas. So it's celebrated throughout Ireland. Traditionally, the women got the day off, and the men did the housework and the cooking. The story we were told was that the women met in each other's homes to sew, and to chat. But I assume they had some liquors to keep them company as well. Although it's again, it was something that has died out in some areas of the country, but we still have it celebrated throughout the country. Not as much as it once was, and it's very popular in parts of the south and southwest. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the general history of Christmas. Where did it come from? What's it all about? So the word itself, the first written, the first recorded use of the word was in 1038. So Christmas it's a shortened form of Christ's Mass or Christus Masse. Now we know the term Christ or Christ. It comes from the Greek word Christos, a translation of the Hebrew word Messiah, which means the anointed one or anointed. Now, you may or may not be aware, but in the early centuries, when Christians were being persecuted, they actively rejected the celebration of Christ's birth because they saw birthdays as a pagan ritual, followed in the Bible by figures like the Pharaoh. So, literally, in the first 3 centuries, his birth wasn't celebrated at all. So, let's have a look at what happened. So, in terms of the Roman Empire, it turned Christian eventually in the 4th century. And during the first 3 centuries, the persecution was pretty acute. 21 of the first 38 popes were martyred. And then in the year 306, the Emperor Constantine began a process of Christianization of the Roman Empire. Essentially, what happened was Constantine had been based in Britain. And by this time, Britain, was again a mix of Christian and pagan, but there was quite a few Christians there, particularly, also in Western Europe, places that we now know as France, there were quite a few Christians there also. Now, Constantine, when his father died, he took over as leader of the troops, and there was he was actually his soldiers carried out this. It occasionally happened where your soldiers would essentially determine that you, their leader, should be the emperor, because there was always, if you like, disagreements between those who were having a good time in Rome, partying and making laws, and those others who were out getting killed out in the field. So there was plenty of room for disagreement and for people to be discontented with what was going on in Rome. And occasionally, somebody would be, if you like, declared emperor in the field. That's what it was called. So Constantine was decreed emperor in the field by his troops. So in order then to become emperor, he actually had to get to Rome. He had to fight his way to Rome against his competitors, and then managed to gain access to Rome and take it over. Now, to do that, he needed an army. So what I believe happened was that he had to make promises to his Christian soldiers that he was recruiting, that if he won, that he would stop the persecution of Christians. And that's what happened. By the year 313, the Edict of Milan, which legalized Christianity, came about. And then in the year 325, he organized the Nicene Council or Synod, which was the first attempt to bring all the Christian groups together, out of which came the Nicene Creed. And then over the next 50 years or so, there was an ongoing battle, if you like, for supremacy within the empire between those who wanted a restoration of the pagan ways and those who wanted Christianity to be adopted. And then in 380, the Emperor Theodosius I proclaimed Christianity as the sole religion of the Roman Empire. Initially, this was more for the Western Empire, but eventually it also went to the East because Constantine moved to Constantinople and he set up the new headquarters in modern day Turkey, partly as a result of the invasions by the German tribes who had taken over Rome on a number of occasions. One of them was in 4010 when Rome fell to the Visigoths under Alaric. Also at that time, the Romans left Britain for the last time. And then in 476, the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustus, he was defeated by the German Goth Odoacer. And that began the Dark Ages in Europe, although in Ireland, we had 3 centuries that we know as the period when Ireland was the island of saints and scholars. So you'll have to excuse me. I've got a bit of a cough, folks. It's not the virus, thankfully. I was in Ireland a while back and I got the Irish cold, and I haven't resorted to the whiskey yet, but I'm seriously contemplating it as the best cure. Anyway, we'll continue. So now I'm going to explore the issue of why is there a Christian festival in the middle of the winter? Now, a lot of people say, that's we all know that. Wasn't Jesus born? Aren't we celebrating the birth of Jesus? But it's not as simple as that. There's no consensus about when Jesus was actually born. The Bible doesn't mention his exact birthday. The Nativity story contains conflicting clues. For instance, the presence of shepherds and their sheep suggests a spring birth. We also know that the Christian holiday of Christmas, it owes many of its traditions to the ancient Roman festival Saturnalia, including the time of the year that Christmas is celebrated. And in a few moments, we'll be looking at Saturnalia in detail. In fact, the first official mention of December the 25th as a holiday honoring Jesus' birthday appears in an early Roman calendar from around 336. Which was about 11 years after the Nicene Synod and during the period when Christianity was establishing itself within the Roman Empire. It was only in the year 340 that Pope Julius I fixed the 25th as being the date of Jesus' birthday. Now, what have we got then in terms of documentation? And so we have the Pascha Computus, which is an anonymous document that was written in North Africa around 243, about 100 years previous to Pope Julius, and that placed his birth on March the 28th. Clement, a very, very famous bishop of Alexandria from 215, he taught Jesus was born on November the 18th. Then in recent times, we have the work of Professor Fitzheimer, who is the Professor Emeritus at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and he estimated that Jesus' birthday occurred on September the 11th in the year 3 BCE. So it doesn't really matter that much. I'll be explaining in a moment, why it was essential for Christianity in terms of it becoming the establishing itself victoriously as the religion of the Roman Empire to have a festival in the winter. So at that time, as I said, early Christians focused not on his birth, but like we do today, we generally we celebrate the anniversary of people's death. So Easter, in particular, and Pentecost, they were the ones that were the main occasions in the Christian calendar for ecclesiastical feasts until midway through the 4th century. Then Christmas and Epiphany, they were added. And of course, this corresponds with the adoption of Christianity by the Roman Empire. At this stage, the Christians were no longer a persecuted sect, but were people now who were in power within the administration and within the apparatus of the Roman Empire. So they were in a position to make decisions and do things like add things to a calendar. So let's have a look a bit more at, December the 25th in particular. So we know that around this time, the winter solstice, and in Rome, it was the festival called the Romans observed what they called Juvenalia, which was a feast. Yes, it was a feast honoring the children of Rome. And what are we doing at Christmas every year? We're honoring children. In addition, members of the upper classes often celebrated the birthday of Mithra, the god of the unconquerable sun, and that was on December the 25th. Of course, going back to ancient times, everybody in all the pagan religions, they all understood that without the sun, there was no life possible on earth. And in all of the ancient religions, the sun was the most important of the gods. Now, for some Romans at this time, Mitra's birthday was the most sacred day of the year. Now, by the 4th century, the Western Christian churches, they celebrating Christmas on December the 25th, and that allowed them then to incorporate the holiday with Saturnalia and the other popular pagan midwinter traditions, which included, believe it or not, gift giving, singing, lighting candles, feasting, and merrymaking. And that's what we do today. Pagans and Christians, they coexisted during this period, not always very happily, because there was military conflict, going on continuously, and it wasn't really until the 390s. There's a major battle in 395 at which the pagans were decisively defeated, and that was really the last significant attempt by pagans to defeat the move towards the Christian takeover of the empire. So again, if you were Christians at that time and you were trying to convert pagans, you had to take into account their traditions. So by having a celebration in December, that was a way to convince the remaining pagan Romans to accept Christianity, because literally there was no way that you're going to be able to convince a lot of them to ignore the single most important celebratory event of the year for them in their pre-Christian world, unless you somehow incorporated it or replaced it. And there was no way you can't really replace a winter equinox. That's nature, or for some people that's God's work, so you couldn't really play around with the dates. It happens at a certain time, that's it. So the transition then literally couldn't have been successful without celebrating the winter equinox. And of course, when you think about it, what better way to do that other than to place the central figure of Christianity into the celebration of the equinox? And that's essentially what happened. So after that, the celebration of Christmas spread throughout the Western world. But even then, many Christians continued to view Epiphany and Easter as more important. And in fact, there are traditions within the Christian church whereby Christmas is not celebrated at all. And we'll be looking in a few minutes at how the Puritans viewed it when they came to this country. So going back to my first slide, I was saying December the 25th was established as the Nativity Feast day, and the official Nativity Mass then, where essentially it was intended to be the Mass where the whole family went, or as much of the family as you could bring. And that was the first Mass of the day, held at 9 a.m. Excuse me, held at 9 a.m. Now, in some cases, there were masses because, for instance, in Ireland, when I was growing up, the church had to have so many masses, otherwise, no one, you couldn't accommodate all the people. So there would have been a mass at 7 and 8, but 9 was the one where you'd have time to get the kids dressed and ready and out. Now, so as time passed by, then the celebration of Christmas became more popular, as did the liturgical practices that went with it. And Christmas Mass then became a central fixture in the church calendar. And as I said earlier, that led then to it becoming known as Christ's Mass or Christmas by the 11th century. Now, so we know that the middle of winter has long been a time of celebration around the world, not just in Europe, um, but anywhere where there is, well, we won't go there for the moment. So centuries before the time of Jesus, early Europeans, they celebrated light and birth in the darkest days of the winter. Um, and we even sense that ourselves today, particularly today, because now we're in the, yesterday was the equinox. So we're looking forward now to the fact that the days are going to get a little bit longer and the good weather is coming. And we're going back into a whole new cycle. So people rejoiced during the winter solstice. For them, the worst of the winter was behind them, and they could look forward to longer days and extended hours of sunlight. Now, that obviously varied again, depending on the part of Europe you would be in, because some places the worst of the winter was yet to come. But generally, within most of the parts of the Roman Empire, that was the case. Now, at the end of December, also, it for many reasons was a perfect time for celebration because at that time of the year, most of the cattle were slaughtered, so they wouldn't have to be fed during the winter. And of course, that meant there was a lot of meat. So for a lot of people, they now were guaranteed, supply of meat for the rest of the winter. Also, most of the wine and beer that had been made during the year was finally fermented and ready for drinking. So it was time for a party. Now, just before I leave the topic, the issue of Xmas, because we know that there's a theory, at least, and a belief that the use of Xmas stems from an attempt by some to remove the religious tradition from Christmas by removing the word Christ. And there's no doubt there are some people who are not Christians who believe that. But the reality is that the use of Xmas dates way back beyond the current controversies anyway. And we have the Greeks to thank for that, if you like. The word Christos, the origin of the word Christ, appears as, and the first letter is X. So that's where we got our X. So the abbreviation Xmas then is based on the first letter, Chi, which appears as X, followed by Mass, which is a shortened version of Mass. Now, the actual holiday that we celebrate today, it replaced a pagan holiday. And the pagan holiday itself was one, if to paraphrase it, it was a praise God. That's what they were doing. They were praising God. And the Christmas trees that we have and the lights and a lot of other things that we decorate were all pagan. Many people don't know but that much of the things we put around the house to celebrate Christmas came from pagans. And I'll be looking at some of those in a moment. And just a bit of nonsense here for those, because one of the big issues, even within Christianity, is the issue of what the focus should be for Christmas Day, and for some people the focus should be on Jesus. It shouldn't be on gifts. It shouldn't be on saints and gift giving and whatever else. So they see the use of Santa as kind of displacing the focus from Jesus. And of course, somebody then had to look at Santa, move the letters around, and realize that you can make the word Satan from it. So I won't go any further with that. So let's have a look at the Puritans I mentioned earlier on. So the Puritans of colonial New England, they actually banned the observance of Christmas because they viewed its traditions, the offering of gifts, decorating trees, etc. They saw all that as linked to paganism. But centrally, or more crucially, the Puritan community found no scriptural justification for celebrating Christmas, and therefore they associated such celebration with paganism and idolatry, very much like what the Christians in the first 3 centuries had done. In the US, there was an additional factor because they saw celebrating Christmas as a British custom. And so that fell out of style following the American Revolution. It wasn't until 1870 that Christmas became a federal holiday. And I do another talk on the origins of Santa and that, and essentially the first the first introduction of you like of what we now know as Santa in this country was with the Dutch, while they still had New York. Well, while New York was known as Amsterdam, as New Amsterdam, so that's going back 400 years or more. So I'm going to play a little bit of music for you now. Some of you may know of Anne Murray. The Leahy family are a wonderful family who sing, play music, and dance. Although in this one here, they're just going to play music and dance. And it's Christmas in Killarney.
Well, I met this next bunch. Not only are they a great big family, they're a great big talented family. You've probably heard them on radio. 9 brothers and sisters from Lakefield, Ontario, the children of a fiddle-playing father and a step-dancing mother from Cape Breton. Please welcome Lee. Holly green, the ivy green, the prettiest picture you've ever seen. It's Christmas in Killarney with all of the folks at home. Nice, to kiss your beau, or cuddling under the mistletoe. Santa Claus, of course, is one of the boys from home. The door is always open, the neighbors beg and call. Father John, before his mom, will bless the house and all. How grand it feels to click your heels and join in the fun of the kids and meals. I'm handing you no brownies, the lights you never know. It's Christmas in Killarney with all of the folks at home. It's Christmas in Killarney with all of the folks at home. It's nice, to kiss your beau and cuddling under the mistletoe. Santa Claus, of course, is one of the boys from home. The door is always open, the neighbors beg and call. Father John, before he's gone, will bless the house and all. The door is always open, the neighbors beg and call. Father John, before he's gone, will bless the house and all. How grand it feels to kick your heels and join in the fun of the chicks and reels. I'm handing you a party, the lights you never know. It's Christmas in Killarney with all of the folks at home. It's Christmas in Killarney with all of the folks at home.
So now I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on Saturnalia, because the central theme of this was how Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And in order to convert people, there were certain traditions that the pre-Christian Romans observed that literally could not be ignored. So, and you'll see some of the similarities from what I show you coming up. There's just an image of if you like, the gaiety that was associated with the time, because it was a time for celebration and party. Now, there are 2 major pre-Christian Roman European festivals that roughly coincide with Christmas. One is the one we're talking about now, the Roman Bacchanalia or Saturnalia, and the other one is the Yule Feast of the Norse countries. And of course, we use Yule today as a synonym for Christmas. So Saturnalia was held from the 17th to the 25th of December. It's an ancient Roman pagan festival honoring no less than the god Saturn herself or himself. So Saturnalia celebrations are the source of many of the traditions that we now see and observe as part of Christmas. It was the most popular holiday on the ancient Roman calendar. It was derived from older farming-related rituals of midwinter and the winter solstice, especially the practice of offering gifts or sacrifices to the gods during the winter sowing season. So fortunately, we don't have sacrifices to the gods these days in any literal sense. So during Saturnalia, and we can kind of relate to this, work and businesses came to a halt, schools and courts of law closed, and the normal social patterns were suspended, and in some cases were inverted. People decorated their homes, as we do today, with wreaths and other greenery, and shed their traditional togas in favor of colorful clothes known as synthesis. And if you look at all the people walking around today with red, well, you can see that there's the comparison holds. Now, of course, we don't have slaves today. Without going into another segue, but slaves, as they were in those days anyway, did not have to work during Saturnalia, or at least many of them didn't. But they were allowed to participate in the festivities, and these would really be the slaves who were domestics. In some cases, they sat at the head of the table while their masters served them, an example of the inversion. Now, instead of working, they spent Saturnalia gambling, singing, playing music, feasting, socializing, and giving each other gifts. And doesn't take a great, deal of imagination to see the similarities with today. Now, wax taper candles called ceri were common gifts, and they were done to signify light returning after the solstice. And with the number of candles that we have today, again, we can see that that tradition still holds. And on the last day of Saturnalia, known as the Sigillaria, many Romans gave their friends and loved ones small terracotta figurines known as signallaria. Now, they may have referred back to older celebrations and possibly ones involving human sacrifice. So at least we've disposed of the worst parts, if you like. Now, what we do know is that it was by far the jolliest Roman holiday. And we know that because people like the Roman poet Catullus, he famously described it as the best of times. And then we have the famous Roman author Pliny. He reportedly built a soundproof room because he wanted to work. Now, the Temple of Saturn is very famous, and the main one was constructed in the 4th century, and that replaced an earlier temple. And it served then as the ceremonial center for later Saturnalia celebrations, because they continued for quite a while. Now, on the first day of the festivities, a young pig would often be publicly sacrificed at the temple, and that was located in what is now the northwest corner of the Roman Forum. So if you're ever over in Rome, you can visit that. Now, the cult statue of Saturn in the temple, it traditionally had woolen bonds tied around its feet, but during Saturnalia, the bonds were loosened to symbolize the god's liberation. Now, another example of the inversion, if you like, was this Lord of Misrule. And in many Roman households, a mock king was chosen, known as the leader of Saturnalia, sometimes called the Lord of Misrule, was usually a lowlier member of the household. The person was responsible for making mischief, insulting guests, wearing crazy clothing, chasing women and girls, etc. So anyway, the idea was that and it appears from the readings that this would have been a young boy. So the idea was that he ruled over chaos rather than the normal Roman order. Now, the common holiday custom of hiding coins or other small objects and cakes is one of many that date back to Saturnalia. And that was the way that they actually chose the mock king, or the Lord of Misrule. Even in my day, we used to have cakes when rings would be put in them and various other things. And if you got the one with the ring, you were going to get married, or there's all sorts of kind of superstitious nonsense associated, with them. But the custom was there of hiding things, baking them in cakes, and getting some meaning out of them. But that's how they chose their leader. Of course, it began as a one-day, event, but it had expanded then to a week-long festival eventually. The comparison with St. Patrick's Day is there. St. Patrick's Day started off as a one-day event. Now it's a week-long event in Ireland, as well as in there's an island in the Caribbean that also has the week-long festival. It'll come to me. No, not yet. Now, on the Julian calendar, which the Romans used, the winter solstice fell on December the 25th. So here's a beautiful song now, Oscailiga by Anya. It's Silent Night, or in Irish, it's Iha Huan. Oops. So that was our Anya there, a beautiful version. The island that I was referring to at the end of the last section in the Caribbean is the island of Montserrat. It's known as the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean, and it was populated by Irish people in the mid 17th century, most of whom were transported out of Ireland. So we've had a look at Saturnalia and the Roman tradition, but obviously in Europe there were a number of other traditions. So I'm going to start with the Celtic. So the roots of much of today's traditions, Christmas traditions, also go back to the ancient Celtic festival of Alban Artún that was held during the winter solstice. And it was one of the ancient Druidic fire festivals. It took place over between the December the 21st to this 22nd, and that was due to the method the Druids used to measure one day, which was a bit different than today. So Alban Artún then coincides with the winter solstice. Now, if you translate Alban Artún, it means the light of Arthur, and it's in reference to King Arthur, because apparently he was born on the winter solstice. Now, Yule, which is synonymous with Christmas, it derives from an Old Norse word, Yule. That was once the name of, yes, a 12-day pagan festival. So when you're thinking of the 12 days of Christmas, we have, again, another obvious overlap here. Now, granted, the 12 days of festival don't lead up to Christmas, so it's a little bit different. Now, so Yule was borrowed into Old English as Gall or Gjol as far back as the 8th century AD, and was originally used both as another name for December, which translates into before Yule, and January, which then translated into after Yule. Now, it's also known as Yule, which is derived from the Anglo-Saxon Eula, which translates into wheel of the year. And that marked the celebration of both the shortest day of the year and the rebirth of the sun. And Yule, or Yule Tide, was and is a festival observed by many historical Germanic peoples. And of course, it later underwent Christianized reformulation, and that's how Yule Tide ended up being Christmas Tide. Now, the custom of burning the Yule Log, which some people still do, the Yule associated tradition, it's familiar to people today. Now, that originally was performed to honor the Great Mother Goddess. The log would be lit on the eve of the solstice using the remains of the log from the previous year, and then it would be burned for 12 hours for good luck, and then whatever remained will be kept to be lit again the following year. Now, the Yule tree, or the Christmas tree, it was also originally a pagan custom, because you had brightly colored decorations would be hung from it. It was usually a pine tree, just like today, to symbolize the various stellar objects which were of significance to the pagans, primarily the sun, moon, and stars. And it also represented in the souls of those who had died in the previous year. That was a nice way to remember them. The modern practice of gift giving evolved from the pagan tradition of hanging gifts on the Yule or Christmas tree as offerings to the various pagan gods and goddesses. So a little segue. I've mentioned a few times just about some differences within the Christian tradition. So this is just another one here in terms of Scotland, because Ireland and Scotland in many ways are so close. But since the Reformation, obviously there were has been some differences. Now, Christmas is not a major holiday for the non-Catholics, in Scotland, which is the majority of the people. Some historians have suggested that the reason that Christmas is downplayed is because of the influence of the Presbyterian Church, or the Kirk, which is known as, because they viewed Christmas as a papist or a Roman Catholic event. So now I'm going to have a look at some of the symbols and some of the things that we use around Christmas. And one obviously is the holly bush and the bits of holly that we pick. So it's one of the symbols that's most commonly associated, and of course it's been used for thousands of years. Now, it has religious significance long before its adoption by Christianity, because remember, pagans were religious people as well, and are still today. Now, in addition to being associated with the sun god Saturn in ancient Rome, holly was also important in the pagan, Druidic religion and customs of other people in Europe. Now, under many pagan religions, then, it was customary to place holly leaves and branches around their dwellings during winter, and that was done as a kindly and hospitable gesture. Now, again, in terms of storytelling, what we get is that they believed that the tiny fairies which inhabited the forests could come into their homes and use the holly as shelter. Now, of course, we know that there aren't tiny fairies out there, But again, it was a nice thought because we know that holly growing in the wild is often used as shelter by small animals and insects. Now, significantly for the Druids, it was holly's evergreen nature that made it special, because they believed that it remained green to help keep the earth beautiful when the deciduous trees shed their leaves. And some of the deciduous trees, like the oak, are also, very sacred trees within the Druidic people's beliefs. Now, it was also their custom to wear holly in their hair when they ventured into the forests, apparently to watch the priests collecting mistletoe. Now, significantly at that stage, the holly berries were thought to represent the sacred menstrual blood of their goddess. Now, then, as Christianity developed, the early Christians then adopted the tradition of decorating their home with holly, and there were very practical reasons for that. Initially, they did it to avoid persecution, because, again, as I said in the beginning, for the first 3 centuries, at least, Christians were persecuted, and then in some cases and in some countries for a long time afterwards. Because remember, it wasn't until around the 9th and 10th century that in the Scandinavian countries that they became Christian. So to avoid persecution, then, you didn't want to stand out as a person who had no holly, because that meant that you weren't one of the locals. And then, of course, when Christianity did gain dominance, they just continued the practice, and maybe for the same reasons, because they understood, how nice it was to have that greenery, and maybe again, the stories that they had meant something to them. The significance changed, though. They now symbolize the blood of Christ, and then holly then just solidified its position to the point that we still have it, and it will probably continue for a long time. So now let's have a look at the other one that we associate with Christmas, the mistletoe. Now, the literal meaning of mistletoe is dung on a twig. And we know that from the Anglo-Saxons, because they realized that the plant is fertilized by the droppings of foraging birds, looking for berries rather than kisses. In one sense, that is sometimes talked about as being a truly unromantic beginning for a plant that came to be seen as the bearer of the male essence with the power to bestow virility as well as no end of passion. Anyway, the Celtic origins of mistletoe, we also, today, you'll see them a lot of the times mentioned as all heal or golden bough. Now, in Victorian times, and I'll be going into a little bit more detail maybe about what happened, because for a while the mistletoe disappeared. But in Victorian times, it was resurrected by the Victorians, who were never seen as the kind of merry party goers, but anyway, they're the ones who get the credit for bringing it back. The old timers hoped that kissing under the mistletoe would lead to romance and marriage among the younger generation. And of course, it continued then to be used things like Christmas parties. The belief was that it was some innocent mischief, but we know from the court cases and the experience that people have had that wasn't always very innocent. So in ancient times, then, the mistletoe was known by the Celts and the Vikings as a healing plant, and upon which then superstition and myth bestowed miraculous healing powers on it. And that was the way it was, because the understanding of science was weak, and so they had no way to explain the positive and negative benefits from using it. So it's a sacred plant in the pagan religion. It's believed to have all sorts of miraculous qualities. For instance, the power of healing diseases, making poisons harmless, giving fertility to humans and animals, protection from witchcraft, banning evil spirits, and of course, bringing good luck and great blessings. And then, as time went on, it was considered so sacred that even enemies who happened to meet beneath a mistletoe in the forest would lay down their arms, exchange a friendly greeting, and keep a truce until the following day. We don't know how that actually, came about, but we know that there's certainly some truth to that. And apparently then from that old custom then grew the practice of suspending mistletoe over a doorway or in a room as a token of goodwill and peace to all comers. So if you went into a house and passed under the mistletoe, you had to be on your best behavior. Now, the Vikings have a lovely story because the Vikings were great storytellers. And when the Vikings invaded Ireland, they made they developed the basis of the city of Dublin, and during the 10th century in particular, they used to have these storytelling festivals, and storytellers from Iceland, from the Nordic countries, and even from Ireland would go to Dublin, and they would have a week-long, essentially storytelling and drinking festival. So this is one of their myths, anyway. That gives you a sense of how good they were at telling the stories. So it was based upon the myth of the resurrection of Baldur. Now, Baldur was the god of the summer sun. And of course, the Vikings, just like all, the ancient societies, they all realized that without the sun, there was no life possible on the earth. They didn't need science to tell them that. They knew that. As the story goes, Baldur had a dream in which he dies. Now, the dream alarmed his mother, Frigga, who was the goddess of love and beauty, because she knew if Baldur died, in other words, if the sun died, well, all life on earth was doomed. So she then went to all the elements, air, fire, water, and earth, as well as the animals and plants on earth, and asked them to spare her son. So then, satisfied that she had secured the cooperation of them all, she assured Baldur, the sun, that he would live forever. But, unfortunately, Baldur had one enemy, Loki, who was the god of evil. And Frigga had no control over him. So we know that mistletoe, the Anglo-Saxons were apparently the first to point this out, grows neither on the ground or under the root. It's an aerial parasite that has no roots of its own and attaches itself to the tree it grows on. So as a result of that, Frigga hadn't come across it. So anyway, Loki made a poison arrow tipped with the mistletoe, and the story goes that he tricked Baldur's blind brother, Hoder, into shooting the arrow and killing Baldur. And then for 3 days, the earth grew dark and the skies poured rain. And then all the elements in turn tried to bring him back to life, but none were successful. Of course, at the end of the day, it took Frigga, his mother, to bring him back. Now, legend says that the tears she shed during those terrible 3 days turned into the white berries that you see on the mistletoe. So in her joy then, at Baldur's resurrection, she reversed mistletoe's poisonous reputation, kissed everyone who passed beneath the tree on which it grew, and issued a decree that should one ever pass beneath the mistletoe, they should have a token kiss, and no harm would befall them. So that's a good story. So anyway, when Christianity took a foothold in the Celtic and Viking regions, particularly in the Viking regions, because it was much later than, because Ireland was converted and England was converted, much, much earlier. The ancient ways then at this stage were condemned as pagan practices, and many of them were abandoned. Not all of them, but many of them were abandoned by the newly converted. And mistletoe was one of the casualties. For centuries then it was forbidden to display mistletoe on Christian altars. And eventually, as I said a couple of slides back, the Victorians brought it back. So it came back through them, and they revived the ancient ritual of kissing under the mistletoe as a sign of love, romance, and good luck. So we'll all have a Christmas toast. So there's a bit of a history, to where the Christmas toast arrived from, and I'll give you that. But first of all, I'll give you a Christmas toast. May all things that impart delight be richly spread upon your board, and may you have an appetite demanding all you can afford. So apparently, alcohol wasn't that great way back. So in the 12th century, the quality of the wine and ale was very unpredictable. So it became common practice to dip spiced toast into the drinks to draw out or just simply to mask the bad flavors. And that continued for centuries until they sorted that problem out. In other words, the quality of the drink improved. And at that stage, then the idea of raising a toast to a special member of a party emerged. And in doing so, it drew on the idea that the guest was like a figurative piece of toast that improved the flavor of the drink. Again, a nice way to think about it. So here's an Irish Christmas blessing for you. The light of the Christmas star to you, the warmth of a home and heart to you, the cheer and goodwill of friends to you, the hope of a childlike heart to you, the joy of 1,000 angels to you, the love of the Son and God's peace to you. As I said at the beginning, I teach Irish history, and these are my classes. I'm going to show you them now for January. The simplest way to contact me is by sending an email. My name is Sean Murphy, 630@gmail.com. So the courses are on Thursday evenings. They're delivered using Zoom as right now, as we're doing right now. One program I have is the history of each county in Ireland, and I give the history over 4 weeks. So this one is County Donegal that's coming up. The second one is part of my program that's the chronological history of Ireland from the very beginning of Ireland as a geological entity 431 million years ago up to the present day. So right now I'm at the stage, I've just finished the Great Hunger or the famine. So I'm looking at the period between the end of the famine and the Easter rising. And that's the best way to contact me. Also, if anybody would like a copy of tonight's presentation, you could send me an email and I would send it to you. I'll be sending one to the library, so you can also get it through the library. So maybe now we'll take some of those questions that you have. And
Sean, Gail says thank you. Happy holidays.
Thank you, Gail.
First initial is S. Don't know what the S stands for, but he or she asks, do you know much about Cardinal Logue, L-O-G-U-E? He is in my family tree, and I have done some light research, mostly from Google and Wikipedia. Just curious if you know anything about him.
Well, just what you would know as well. I don't know him. I've never studied him. So anything that I would know about him, I would have got, from Wikipedia. So I can't really help you there. Just follow up on. There's so much information out there now that you can get. It's wonderful. So you're doing the right thing. You can check as well and see if there's any biography of him.
Mm-hmm. Judith says, thank you. Patricia says, fascinating presentation. Thank you. Mary Jones, wonderful presentation. She learned so much. Merry Christmas. Jody says it was an excellent talk. She learned so much. Thank you. Renee asks me, will you be sending a copy of Sean's slides to all of us, or do you want us to email Sean to request them? I can send them to all of you. Renee says this was lovely, so much wonderful information. So if anyone has any further comments or questions, you want to get them into the chat within the next 15 to 30 seconds. Otherwise, we're gonna wrap up here.
Yeah, I'll just show you some of the other things that I have here. When you get the presentation, here's another beautiful piece. I just didn't have the time to play it. When a Child is Born by Susan Boyle and Johnny Mathis. And then I have one here on the streets of Dublin, the Messiah, being sung outdoors by a choir. I have a list of songs and tunes for Christmas that you can get online. There's more there. Handel's Messiah. I have some videos referenced here as well that go over some of the material that I've given you here. There's also an hour of Celtic Christmas music that you can get, and it's nice to have it for Christmas Day, maybe. Then there's some other songs, and then I have a list of websites that I used. There's also some articles here. One is on the winter solstice. The other is on Saturnalia. Then there's a journal article on the holiday customs of Ireland. So again, there's material here that you may find useful. So I will send you a copy of the presentation. and you can send it out to people. And if anybody is interested in my courses, you can just contact me directly at that email address.
Great. John says, thank you. Happy Christmas.
Thank
great.
you.
We'll wrap it there, Sean. I want to thank you for a wonderful presentation. We had a very large audience for you that was very attentive. So I wish you a Merry Christmas, or I guess I should say Happy Christmas. And I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future. So I thank you all so much for joining us. By the way, we have a introduction to Kwanzaa tomorrow night at 7 o'clock via Zoom, if anyone is interested in learning more about Kwanzaa. But Sean wrapped up our Christmas programming for us. I hope you all enjoyed it. Want to thank the Friends of the Tewksbury Library once more, and also want to thank the libraries in Georgetown, North Andover, and Essex for helping us promote tonight's program. So thanks again, Sean. Thank you, everyone.
And
have a great
night. In March, I do presentations on St. Patrick, so you might be interested in those. I'll be sending out information about those, but for anyone else, just be on the lookout for my St. Patrick's courses, because they will go into a lot more detail on the Christianization of Ireland. And obviously the link between Ireland and Rome, and explain why Ireland was never conquered by the Romans.
Well, Sean, it sounds like I'll be seeing you in March. I'll shoot you an email and we can schedule something. So
great.
Thank you all so much, and everyone have a great night.